This story was told to me by my mom a few times. This happened when she was around 11 years old. She's now 46 this year as I tell this to you. This happened on a day when one of my mom's sisters named Jane was arguing with her mom. I wasn't really told the details of what they were arguing about, but eventually her sister Jane ran out the door and off into the woods. My mom and her other sister, Ramona, went after her to find her since it was starting to get dark out at this point. They were running for a good while in the direction she ran until they had to stop because Ramona had to tie her shoes since they became knotted. She told my mom to wait next to her and to not run off while she worked on unknotting her shoes. While she was waiting there for her to fix her laces, she was looking around for a bit trying to find Jane until she noticed someone standing nearby the woods next to a rundown shack. There was this guy and he was wearing dirty blue jeans, a dirty blue sweater, and had messy blonde hair. But the one thing that stood out from the rest of this guy's features was that it looked like he had no face. At that moment, she was assuming that she was either just seeing things or the sun was getting in her eyes since it was a little past 6 and the sun would just be setting at this time. She eventually asked Ramona if she could see that guy. Hey, do you see that guy over there? Her sister eventually looked up from her shoes to see what she was pointing out. Yeah? Do you see a face on that man? No. Do you? Ramona, I don't think that man has a face. All the while, when they were standing there, staring at the man, my mom noticed that they were clenching and unclenching their fists over and over, as if he were angered and was about to do something to them. They then turned and ran for it away from there as fast as possible, while still looking for Jane. They kept running for a good while, and eventually made it to this unfinished street that had a partially unfinished road, and some unfinished buildings that was one street over from where they lived. They eventually found Jane when she came out from behind one of the unfinished buildings, scaring them. My mom and her sister scolded her for running off, and then told her what happened to them moments ago, but she didn't believe them no matter what they tried to tell her. They gave up on this and ran back home, finally making it to tell their mother about what just happened. From what I remember, my grandma in this situation was creeped out by what they told her. I remember her telling me a bit about this as well. To this day, my mother doesn't really know what they saw in the woods, and thinking back to it now still creeps her out to this day. This one was told by my dad and happened around when he was like 10 years old. He's in his 50s now and still doesn't know what to think of it other than what he described it as. This all happened when he and his friends were biking around the street that day. It was a suburban neighborhood they lived in at the time. As far as I've been told, every kid and adult was inside when this happened. Eventually, it got to be afternoon when they were still messing around with their bikes, racing each other, and so on. After a while, one of them called out to the others, noticing something in the sky above them. An object that was noticeably following them from above wherever they went on the road, no matter how slow or fast they went. From what my dad described, it looked to be almost like a hot water tank with something on the end of it spinning on its axle while floating high above around 4,000 feet as they have guessed. They were bewildered by this and weren't sure what to think of this, so they rode off towards my dad's house in a hurry to tell his mom about this. She didn't believe them at first, of course, but eventually convinced her to come outside to see what they were talking about. Dad pointed it out above them, the object still floating there, and describing it as it was that was following them. See, watch, it follows us wherever we go. They rode down and back up the road, stopping in front of the house while it followed directly above them. His mom then frantically told them in a panic to get inside and all of the others to get their asses home. At this point, the cops were called simply because they didn't really know what to make of it and didn't know what to do. When they finally arrived, the thing was long gone, nowhere to be seen, not even beyond the mountains. With nothing to prove of what they saw, all they could do was make a report of it and keep an eye out. Most of the people that were either my dad's friends or brothers have passed away at some point or another that were involved with this years ago. The only person that knows of this story now is my dad, and to this day, he only remembers some parts of this, hence why I wanted to tell this to you. Now this one is actually by me, and this was something I experienced when I was 5 years old. Now this may sound unbelievable, I know, considering that it's hard for most people to remember anything specific that happened to them at a young age like that. The only thing that I can think of about this is that it was like a nightmare, but it leads into reality in a way, like sleepwalking. This all happened when it was getting pretty late, a time where I should have been in bed like 11 p.m. or so. My parents and brother were all already sleeping at this point, and the TVs were turned off. I still remember this occurring when I was sitting on the floor messing around with a Rubik's Cube in the light of a lamp close to me. My eyes started to feel a little heavy, so I decided to lay on my side on the carpeted floor and close them for just a bit. Suddenly I started to hear a weird noise somewhere in the kitchen, and this was one room over from the living room I was in. When I got up and opened my eyes, I couldn't see anything and soon realized the room was dark. It was like the power went out without any noise, which confused me since I knew what it sounded like if the power did go out. Only thing is, I didn't hear it. I started to panic since at a very young age I was afraid of the dark still. I wanted to cry, but it was like something wouldn't let me, and that something told me I shouldn't. My surroundings were barely visible and I couldn't make out where I was, but the one thing I remembered clearly about this part was that both my parents and brother were gone. I got close to where they were sleeping and felt around, but nothing. I looked back to the kitchen in the dark doorway, once again hearing a weird audible scuttling sound against the floor. At this point I forget what was going through my head because I remember just slowly making my way to the kitchen towards where I heard the noise. Eventually I made it to the doorway of the kitchen, looking around to see where the noise came from, but barely seeing anything. Another noise happened, and this time it sounded similar to an animal puffing their nose as I remembered it sounding. My head turned towards the corner from where it came from. The corner was hidden behind a couch that was there because we had couches in the kitchen when this happened. I remember looking away from the corner trying to see if any of my family was in the kitchen, thinking that they possibly heard the noises too and came in here, but still no sign of them. Once again, another noise came from the corner of the room and I turned to see nothing still, but I knew I heard something going up the wall, so I looked up near the ceiling to see something that truly was terrifying to see. I remember seeing only what looked like two glowing orbs at first, but as my eyes started to adjust to this darkness, I started to see the shape of this thing. It looked like a hairless, human-like figure with a skeletal look to it, staring back at me with its mouth gaped wide open, with its front having a skull look to it. The part that truly terrified me was when it made this otherworldly screech that no normal person I ever knew would make. It did this again as it stuck to the wall, close to the ceiling in the corner, staring back at me, the large front of its jaws opening wider with the screeches. The thing then lunged at me. And then everything went dark after falling over and hitting the floor. I woke up in the morning to find myself in the kitchen on the floor in the brightness of the morning sun. Getting up, I recalled what happened the night before, looking up and around, but no sign of the creature. Still scared, I ran into the living room to see my parents and brother still sleeping. Running into them, waking them up, I cried into their arms after what I just experienced. It honestly shook me for a while, and it made it hard to sleep for a week after that. At the time, I didn't know what to think of it, and didn't want to think about it. But now all I can theorize is that it was a nightmare that I had. As for how I woke up in the kitchen, it might be possible that while I was moving around in this nightmare, I was also sleepwalking while it happened. Another time when something like this happened is when I woke up standing in the bathroom, so I really do believe that was a nightmare that was affecting me in some way physically. I'm not really sure what the creature was even now, but I'm pretty sure it's similar to either the rake or the skinwalker.